The desert didn't care about men's plans. Ethan had learned that young, watching his father fight the land year after year, pulling life from soil that wanted to give nothing back. 16 years of watching, learning, becoming something the old man never quite understood. At 22, Ethan Callahan stood just over 6 feet, lean and rope-strong from work that started before dawn and ended after dark. His hands were scarred from barbed wire and rough wood. His face, weathered beyond his years, rarely showed what he was thinking. Most folks in Millerton assumed he was simple. Quiet meant stupid to people who measured a man by how much noise he made in the saloon. They saw him ride into town once a month for supplies, saw him nod politely and speak only when spoken to, saw him leave without fanfare. They didn't see what the desert had carved into him. His father, William Callahan, was 63 and looked older. A bad fall 2 winters back had left him with a limp and a cough that never quite went away. The ranch, 200 acres of stubborn land 30 miles from Millerton, was all they had. No hired hands, no neighbors close enough to matter, just the two of them, a dozen head of cattle, some chickens, and a water well that threatened to run dry every summer. "You checked the fence line on the eastern 40?" William asked that evening, his voice rough as old leather. "Twice," Ethan said. He was mending a saddle on the porch, working the leather with practiced hands. "3 posts need replacing. I'll get to it tomorrow." "Always tomorrow with you." "I fixed the barn door today, and the chicken coop, and reshod both horses." Ethan didn't look up from his work. "Tomorrow's for the fence." William grunted, which was as close to approval as he usually got. He sat in his chair watching the sun paint the desert gold and orange. "Storm coming in a few days. Can feel it in my bones." "Your bones have been wrong before." "Not about storms." They fell into comfortable silence, the kind that comes from years of sharing space without needing to fill it with words. The ranch house was small, 2 bedrooms, a main room that served as kitchen and living area, and a porch that wrapped around the front. The wood was weathered gray, the roof patched in 3 places, but it kept the rain out and the worst of the heat at bay. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. The gunfire started just before sunset. It came from the south, distant but clear in the desert air. Sharp cracks that echoed across the emptiness, then silence, then more shots in rapid succession. Ethan's hand stopped moving. William pushed himself up from his chair. "That's from town," the old man said. "Too far to be town. Maybe halfway." "Could be hunters?" "No." Ethan set the saddle aside and stood. "That's rifle fire, multiple shooters, and something heavier, maybe a shotgun." They listened. The shooting continued for maybe 2 minutes, then stopped abruptly. The silence that followed felt wrong, like the desert was holding its breath. "Could be nothing," William said, but he didn't sound convinced. "Could be." They waited as the sun dropped below the horizon and the first stars appeared. Ethan's mind was already working through possibilities. The nearest ranch was 15 miles west, the Hendersons, an older couple with no children. Town was 30 miles south. Between here and there, nothing but open country and a few abandoned homesteads where squatters sometimes camped. The rider appeared an hour after full dark. Ethan heard the horse before he saw it, a hard gallop, reckless in the darkness. He'd already pulled his rifle from inside, a Henry repeater his father had bought off a drifter 5 years back. 16 rounds. He'd fired maybe 100 through it, keeping it clean and oiled but rarely using it for more than the occasional coyote. "Someone's coming fast," he called to his father. William emerged from the house with his old Navy Colt, the percussion revolver he'd carried during the war. "Friend or trouble?" "We'll know soon." The rider burst into the yard, horse lathered and wild-eyed. Ethan recognized him, Charlie Brennan, one of the younger men who worked at the general store in Millerton. 20 years old, skinny, always had a joke ready. He wasn't joking now. "They hit the town," Charlie gasped, barely staying in the saddle. "They hit the goddamn town!" "Who did?" Ethan asked, rifle lowered but ready. "Gang. 6 of them, maybe 7. Came in just before sunset. Shot the deputy, robbed the bank, killed old man Parsons when he tried to stop them." The words tumbled out in a rush. "They took everything, money, supplies, horses. Burned the sheriff's office on the way out." "Where's Sheriff Hendricks?" William asked. "Dead. They shot him first, rode right up and shot him in the street like a dog." Charlie's voice cracked. "My sister was there. She saw the whole thing." Which way did they go? Ethan's voice was calm, flat. North, straight north. Charlie looked at Ethan, then at the darkness behind him. They're heading this way. That's why I rode out, to warn you. They're following the old trail, the one that runs past Henderson's place. If they keep going, they'll hit your ranch by dawn. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush stone. How long ago did they leave town? Ethan asked. Maybe an hour. They weren't in a hurry, laughing and drinking, carrying on like they owned the place. But one of them, their leader, I think, he was asking about ranches out this way, asking about who lived where, who had money, who had supplies. What did people tell them? Everything. They were terrified, Ethan. These aren't regular outlaws. There's something wrong with them, like they enjoy it. William stepped forward. You need to keep riding, son. Get to the Henderson place, warn them, then keep going west to the Thompson Ranch. They need to know. I will. Charlie looked at Ethan. You should come with me, both of you. There's nothing here worth dying for. Go, Ethan said quietly. Warn the others. Charlie hesitated, then nodded and wheeled his horse around. They watched him disappear into the darkness, the sound of hoofbeats fading quickly. He's right, William said. We should go. Where? West. Catch up with Charlie, hole up at Thompson's. Let them ride past. Ethan looked at his father, really looked at him. The limp, the way he favored his right side, the exhaustion that lived in his eyes. You'd make it maybe 10 miles before you couldn't ride anymore. Then what? Then you go on without me. No. Boy, this is our land. Ethan's voice was still quiet, but something had shifted in it. 16 years I've watched you break your back for this place. Watched you bleed and sweat and hurt for every inch of it. And now you want to run? I want you alive. Then we stay, and we make them wish they'd gone a different direction. William studied his son's face in the lamplight. What he saw there made him pause. This wasn't the quiet boy who fixed fences and mended saddles. This was something else, something that had been building beneath the surface for years. 6 men, Ethan, maybe 7. I heard. We've got 1 rifle and an old pistol. We've got this ranch. We know every inch of it. They don't. You ever killed a man? The question hung in the air between them. No, Ethan said. But I've thought about it. I've thought about what I'd do if someone came for what's ours. I've thought about it a lot. William was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he nodded. Then we better get ready. They worked through the night. First, they secured the animals. The cattle were already in the eastern pasture, far from the house. The chickens went into the reinforced coop with extra water. The horses, their 2 riding horses and 1 old plow mare, went into the barn with feed enough for 2 days. Then Ethan started modifying the ranch. The main fence line ran 200 yards from the house on all sides. Simple post and wire construction meant to keep cattle in, not men out. Ethan couldn't change that, but he could make it work for them. He pulled down sections on the south and east sides, the direction the gang would come from, creating gaps that looked like damage from weather or age. Natural entry points, predictable. You're making it easier for them to get in, William observed. I'm making them think they know where to go. When someone sees an obvious opening, they stop looking for traps. Inside the fence line, Ethan placed obstacles. He dragged old equipment into careful positions. A broken wagon here, a pile of rotted lumber there. From a distance, they looked like neglect. Up close, they created choke points and forced paths. He was building a maze without walls. The barn became their fortress. It sat 50 yards from the house, a large structure with a hayloft and 2 entrances. The main door facing south, a smaller door on the north side. Ethan reinforced both doors from the inside with planks and nails, but left them able to open quickly if needed. He cut rifle slots in 3 walls, high up near the roofline. From those positions, a shooter could cover almost the entire yard. You've been planning this, William said. It wasn't a question. I've been thinking about it. There's a difference. Not much of one. They stored water in the barn, every bucket and barrel they could spare. Food, too. Dried beef and hardtack that would keep. Ammunition went into a wooden box in the center of the loft. Ethan counted it carefully. 64 rounds for the Henry rifle, 18 for the pistol, and a box of old shotgun shells for a weapon they didn't have anymore. We need more guns, William said. We need to be smart with what we have. Ethan had moved to the house, working by lamplight. He was mixing something in a bucket, coal oil and lye soap, creating a thick paste. William recognized it from his army days. Fire, the old man said. Fire, Ethan confirmed. We soak rags, place them around the property. If we need to, we light them. Create smoke, confusion, light. Makes it hard to see, hard to breathe, hard to aim. Also burns down everything we own. Rather burn it ourselves than watch them do it. They placed the fire rags strategically, near the fence gaps by the old wagon, around the perimeter of the yard. Each one was tied to a stake driven deep into the ground, ready to be lit with a torch. Ethan made 3 torches, wrapping oiled cloth around long handles of green wood. As midnight approached, they took stock. The house was dark, every lamp extinguished. The barn had one small light in the loft, barely visible from outside. Their rifles and supplies were positioned. Their escape route, if it came to that, was planned. Out the north barn door, to the horses, then northwest toward the Badlands where no one would follow. You should try to sleep, William said. I'll take first watch. I'm not tired. You're lying, but I understand. The old man settled into the loft, his back against a hay bale, the Navy Colt in his lap. When I was your age, in the war, I had a night like this once, waiting for the Confederates to attack our position. We knew they were coming, just didn't know when. Longest night of my life. What happened? They came at dawn. We held them off for 6 hours before reinforcements arrived. Lost half our company. William was quiet for a moment. I killed 3 men that day. Maybe 4. Never been sure about the 4th. We were both shooting at the same time. How'd it feel? Like nothing. During the fight, I mean. Your body just does what it needs to do. It's after that it hits you. When everything's quiet and you're looking at what you did. He looked at his son. It changes you, Ethan. Don't think it won't. I know. No, you don't, but you will. They sat in silence, listening to the desert night. Somewhere in the distance a coyote called. Another answered. The wind picked up slightly, carrying the smell of dust and sage. Tell me about her, Ethan said suddenly. Who? My mother. You never talk about her. William shifted uncomfortably. Why now? Because I want to know. Because tomorrow we might be dead and I'll have missed my chance to ask. The old man was quiet for so long Ethan thought he wouldn't answer. Then, she was beautiful, not pretty, beautiful, strong. She could outride most men and outshoot half of them. Came from Texas, daughter of a rancher who lost everything in the war. We met in a town not much bigger than Millerton. He paused. She died bringing you into the world. Infection. The doctor said there was nothing he could do. You blame me. I blame myself. I brought her out here to the middle of nowhere with no proper doctor, no real hospital. I thought love and hard work would be enough. He looked at Ethan. I named you after her father, Ethan Walsh. He was a good man. Would have been proud of what you've become. I'm not anything yet. You're more than you think, boy. They fell silent again. Ethan thought about the mother he'd never known, the grandfather whose name he carried, the weight of legacy and land and choices that couldn't be unmade. Around 3 a.m, William dozed off despite himself. Ethan let him sleep. He moved through the barn quietly, checking their preparations one more time. Everything was ready. Everything he could control, at least. He climbed to the loft and looked out through one of the rifle slots. The desert stretched in every direction, silver and shadow under the half-moon. Somewhere out there, 6 men were riding toward him. 6 men who killed for money and pleasure, who'd already murdered at least 3 people today, who would burn this ranch to ashes without a second thought. Ethan wasn't afraid. That surprised him. He'd expected fear, thought it would come in shakes and cold sweats and the urge to run. But what he felt instead was something colder, harder, a kind of clarity. He'd spent his whole life preparing without knowing what he was preparing for. Now he knew. The first hint of dawn touched the eastern sky around 5:30. William woke with a start, reaching for his pistol before he remembered where he was. Anything? Nothing. Maybe they went a different direction. Maybe. They ate cold beans and drank water, not risking a fire or the smell of cooking. Ethan's hands were steady. His mind felt sharp, focused. Every sound registered, the creak of the barn settling, the rustle of mice in the hay, the morning wind starting to rise. "Whatever happens," William said, "I want you to know I'm proud of you. I haven't said it enough, but it's true. You've become a better man than I ever was. We're going to be fine. Maybe. But if we're not, we will be." The sun rose slowly, painting the desert in shades of red and gold. And in that light, Ethan saw them coming. 6 riders spread out in a loose line, moving at an easy pace. Even from a distance, he could see they were well armed and confident. They weren't sneaking or hiding. They were men who'd never had reason to be afraid. "They're here," Ethan said quietly. William moved to another rifle slot, peering out. 6, just like Charlie said. They watched the gang approach. As they got closer, details emerged. The leader rode slightly ahead, a tall man on a black horse, wearing a long coat despite the growing heat. To his right, a stocky Mexican with crossed bandoliers. To his left, a thin man in a bowler hat. The other 3 spread out behind, all of them scanning the ranch as they approached. They stopped at the southern fence line, just outside rifle range. "Smart," William muttered. "They're looking it over first." The leader raised one hand, pointing at different parts of the ranch. The house, the barn, the fence gaps. He was making decisions, giving orders. 2 of the riders split off, moving east and west to circle the property. The other 4 stayed together, waiting. "They're going to surround us," Ethan said. "Expected that. When they move in, they'll come from multiple directions. We can't watch everything at once. So we don't watch everything. We watch what matters." The 2 scouts completed their circuit and returned, reporting something to the leader. He nodded. Then the whole group moved forward slowly, entering the property through one of the fence gaps Ethan had created. They were in the maze now. The gang spread out as they advanced, using the cover Ethan had placed. They were experienced, careful, not rushing. One of them, the youngest, maybe 19 or 20, kept looking at the barn, his rifle up and ready. When they were about 100 yards out, the leader called a halt. His voice carried across the morning air, rough and amused. "You in the barn. We know you're in there. Saw the light last night, and there's fresh horse shit in the yard. No point hiding." Ethan and William stayed silent, waiting. "Here's how this works," the leader continued. "You come out, hands up, and maybe you get to keep breathing. We take what we want and move on. Simple, easy. Nobody has to die this morning." Still silence from the barn. The leader sighed theatrically. "Fine. Carlos, check the house." The stocky Mexican dismounted and moved toward the house, pistol drawn. He climbed the porch steps carefully, tried the door, found it unlocked. He went inside, was gone for maybe 2 minutes, then emerged shaking his head. "Nobody home, Graves. But people live here, see? Food's still warm in the stove." So the leader's name was Graves. Ethan filed that away. "Then they're definitely in the barn," Graves said. He raised his voice again. "Last chance, boys. Come out, or we burn you out. And trust me, burning's not a good way to go. Seen it before. Smells terrible, and the screaming goes on for longer than you'd think." Ethan looked at his father. William's jaw was set, his old pistol steady in his hand. He gave a small nod. "All right," Ethan called out, his voice carrying across the yard. "We're coming out. Don't shoot." "Now that's sensible," Graves sounded pleased. "Slow and easy. Guns on the ground first." Ethan grabbed one of the torches and the small box of matches they'd prepared. William saw what he was doing and smiled grimly. He moved to the north door while Ethan stayed at the south. "We're opening the door," Ethan called. "Give us a minute." "Take your time. We're not going anywhere." Ethan struck a match. The sound was loud in the quiet barn, that distinctive scrape and hiss. He touched it to the torch, and flame bloomed bright. The gang couldn't see it yet, couldn't see what was about to happen. "On 3, Ethan whispered to his father. 1, 2, 3. He threw open the south door and hurled the lit torch in a high arc. It spun through the air, trailing sparks, and landed perfectly on one of the oil-soaked rags near the old wagon. Fire caught instantly, spreading fast. Simultaneously, William crashed through the north door, moving as fast as his old legs could carry him toward the horses waiting in their stalls. "What the hell?" someone shouted. Another rag caught fire. Then another. Thick, black smoke began to pour across the yard, the burning oil creating a choking haze. The gang's horses spooked, dancing and snorting. Ethan was already back in position at the rifle slot, the Henry to his shoulder. Through the smoke, he could see shapes moving, confused and disoriented. He picked his target, the man in the bowler hat, dismounting and trying to calm his horse. The first shot of the battle cracked across the desert morning. Ethan missed. The bullet kicked up dust 3 feet to the left. Bowler hat dove for cover behind a water trough, and suddenly everyone was shooting. The world exploded into noise and chaos. Bullets slammed into the barn walls, punching through old wood and showering Ethan with splinters. He ducked, moved to another slot, fired again. This time he came closer, saw the round spark off metal near Carlos's position. More fire rags caught, and now the smoke was everywhere, turning the yard into a hellscape of flame and shadow. Ethan could hear his father's horse galloping away to the north, the old man escaping like they'd planned. Good. At least one of them would survive this. But Ethan wasn't leaving. He fired methodically, not trying for kill shots, but keeping the gang pinned down, forcing them to stay in cover. After his 5th shot, he moved positions again. The gang was learning where he was, concentrating their fire on his last location. Through a gap in the smoke, he saw Graves dismount and move with practiced efficiency toward the barn's east side, where there was no rifle slot. The man was smart, using the smoke and confusion to advance while his crew kept Ethan busy. Ethan shifted to cover that approach, but as he moved, his foot caught on a loose board. He stumbled, and in that half-second of distraction, he heard it, the sharp crack of a rifle from a different angle. Pain exploded across his left shoulder. He went down hard, the Henry clattering from his hands. Blood, hot and fast, soaked through his shirt. He'd been hit. Not the shoulder itself. If it had been, he'd probably lose the arm. This was higher, closer to the neck. Bad, but not immediately fatal. Through graying vision, he saw the barn door buckle. Someone was forcing it open. He scrambled for the rifle with his good arm, got his hand on it, pulled it close. The door crashed inward. Graves stepped through, pistol raised, silhouetted against the smoke and fire outside. He was maybe 40, weathered and hard, with eyes that had seen too much violence to be shocked by more. "Well," he said, looking down at Ethan bleeding on the floor. "You've got spirit, I'll give you that." Ethan raised the Henry one-handed, finger on the trigger. Graves shot first. The bullet hit the rifle itself, smashing the action and nearly tearing it from Ethan's grip. His hand went numb, and the weapon fell useless to the hay-strewn floor. "That's done," Graves said. He advanced slowly, his pistol trained on Ethan's chest. "Nothing personal, kid. You made your choice. Now you get to live with it, or rather, you don't." Ethan's vision was tunneling, blood loss pulling him toward unconsciousness. He thought about his father, hoped the old man had gotten far enough away. Thought about the mother he'd never known, wondered if he'd see her soon. Then gunfire erupted from outside, different now, coming from the north. Graves turned, distracted for just a moment. That's when William Callahan came through the smoke on horseback, his old Navy Colt blazing. He'd circled back. The stubborn old fool had circled back. One of Graves's men went down, clutching his leg. Another dove for cover, and in that moment of chaos, while Graves spun to face this new threat, Ethan saw his chance. He grabbed the broken Henry by the barrel, surged to his feet through sheer will, and swung it like a club. The heavy wooden stock caught Graves across the side of the head. The man staggered but didn't fall, tough as old leather. He brought his pistol around, and Ethan hit him again, harder this time. Graves went down to one knee. Outside, William's horse screamed. The old man was thrown from the saddle, hitting the ground hard. His pistol flew from his hand, landing somewhere in the smoke. "Pa!" Ethan tried to move toward the door, but his legs wouldn't cooperate. He fell against the barn wall, leaving a red smear across the wood. Graves was getting up, blood streaming down his face, but still conscious, still dangerous. He'd lost his pistol in the fall, but he pulled a knife instead, a long, brutal thing that looked like it had opened more than one man. "You just don't quit, do you?" he said, advancing on Ethan. Ethan had nothing left. No weapons, no strength, no plan. Just stubbornness and the absolute refusal to die in this barn while his father was out there fighting. He waited until Graves was close, then kicked out hard with both feet. It wasn't elegant or calculated, just desperate. But his boots caught Graves in the knee, and the man stumbled backward, arms windmilling for balance, directly into one of the support posts. His head hit the wood with a hollow thunk, and he dropped like a stone, finally unconscious. Ethan tried to stand, failed, tried again. His shoulder was on fire, and the world kept tilting sideways. He could hear fighting outside, gunshots and shouts and the screams of frightened horses. His father was out there. His father needed help. He made it to the door, using the wall for support every step. Blood dripped from his fingertips, leaving a trail across the floor. His vision swam, but he kept moving because stopping meant dying, and dying meant his father died too. Outside was hell. The fire had spread to the fence and part of the house. Smoke everywhere, thick and choking. Through it, Ethan could see shapes struggling. His father was on the ground, the stocky Mexican, Carlos, standing over him with a pistol aimed at his head. "No!" Ethan tried to shout, but it came out as barely a whisper. The youngest gang member, the 19-year-old kid, stood off to the side. He had a clear shot at William. His rifle was up, aimed, ready. All he had to do was pull the trigger. Ethan locked eyes with him across the smoke and fire and chaos. The kid was terrified. Ethan could see it in his face, in the way his hands shook, in the two wide eyes that had seen things today they'd never forget. This wasn't a hardened killer. This was someone who'd made bad choices and couldn't find the way back. "Don't," Ethan said, finding his voice. "Don't do it." For 3 seconds, the world held its breath. Then the kid lowered his rifle, just dropped it to his side, shaking his head slowly. He looked at Ethan with something like gratitude, turned, and walked away into the smoke. Leaving. Abandoning his gang, choosing something different. Carlos hadn't noticed. He was focused on William, saying something Ethan couldn't hear over the roar of flames. His finger was on the trigger. Ethan dropped to his knees and grabbed for anything. Found a rock the size of his fist. He threw it with everything he had left. The rock hit Carlos in the back of the head. It wasn't enough to knock him out, but it broke his concentration. He spun around, pistol swinging toward Ethan. William, still on the ground, grabbed Carlos's ankle and pulled hard. The Mexican went down, his gun discharging into the dirt. Before he could recover, William was on him, 50 years of hard labor and old rage in every blow. They fought in the dirt like animals, too close for guns, just fists and fury. Ethan tried to help, but his body had finally had enough. His knees buckled and he fell face first into the dust. The last thing he heard before consciousness left him was another gunshot. Then nothing. Pain dragged Ethan back to consciousness like fishhooks in his flesh. His first breath pulled in smoke and dust, making him cough, which sent fresh agony through his shoulder. He was still in the yard, face down in dirt that tasted of ash and copper. The sun had climbed higher. He'd been out maybe 20 minutes, maybe an hour. Time felt broken. Someone was crying. Ethan forced his eyes open. The world swam into focus slowly, edges blurred and colors too bright. The fires had mostly burned themselves out, leaving smoldering wreckage and black scorch marks across everything he'd known. The barn still stood, barely. The house was damaged but intact. Small victories that felt hollow. The crying came from his left. He turned his head, sending fresh waves of nausea through his gut, and saw Carlos. The stocky Mexican was sitting in the dirt about 15 feet away, both hands pressed against his stomach. Blood seeped between his fingers, dark and steady. His face had gone the color of old paper. "Madre de Dios," Carlos whispered, over and over. "Madre de Dios." No one was helping him. No one was even nearby. Ethan tried to push himself up and managed to get to his knees before vertigo nearly sent him back down. His left arm hung useless, the whole shoulder wet and sticky. He'd lost a lot of blood, needed to stop the bleeding or he'd be joining Carlos in the dirt, praying to saints that might not be listening. "Pa?" he croaked. His throat felt like he'd swallowed broken glass. Movement near the barn. William emerged, limping worse than before, his face a mess of cuts and bruises. But he was alive. He was walking. When he saw Ethan upright, something like relief crossed his battered features. "Stay down," William said, moving toward him. "You shouldn't be moving." "Neither should you." Ethan looked past his father. "Where are the others?" "Dead or gone. 3 dead for sure. Graves is unconscious in the barn, tied him up before he could wake. The one with the bowler hat ran off when things went bad. That kid, the young one, he just walked away before the real fighting even finished." William knelt beside Ethan, examining the shoulder wound with practiced hands. "This is bad, son. Bullet went clean through, which is good, but you've lost too much blood." Carlos? Gut shot. I didn't mean to. We were fighting for the gun and it went off. He's got maybe an hour, maybe less. They both looked at the dying man. Carlos had stopped praying and was just staring at the sky now, tears cutting clean tracks through the dust on his face. 23, maybe 25 years old. Probably had a family somewhere. Probably had dreams that didn't include bleeding out in the dirt at a ranch whose name he'd never even known. Help me, Carlos whispered. Not to them. To anyone. To the empty sky. William looked away. Nothing we can do for him. Gut wounds like that, even a real doctor couldn't save him. We give him water, make him comfortable, that's all. That's all, Ethan repeated. The words felt inadequate and true at the same time. William tore strips from his own shirt. It was ruined anyway, covered in blood and dirt and burn marks, and packed Ethan's wound as best he could. The pressure made Ethan see stars, but the old man's hands were steady, efficient. He'd done this before, during the war, when field medicine meant keeping someone alive long enough to reach a real surgeon. You're going to be fine, William said, but his eyes told a different story. We need to get you inside, clean this properly, see how bad it really is. I can walk. Sure you can. William didn't argue, just got his shoulder under Ethan's good arm and helped him stand. The world tilted hard to the left, then righted itself slowly. Ethan's legs felt like they belonged to someone else, but they held his weight. They made it to the porch before Ethan had to stop, breathing hard, black spots dancing at the edges of his vision. Just a minute, he said. Take your time. Behind them, Carlos had gone quiet. Ethan didn't turn to look. He didn't want to know if the man was dead or still suffering. There was already too much he'd have to carry from this morning. Inside, the house looked violated. Not destroyed. The gang hadn't had time for that, but touched by hostile hands. Drawers pulled open, supplies scattered, the feeling of strangers moving through private spaces. William's war medals, kept in a small box on the mantel, had been dumped on the floor. Someone had stepped on one, leaving a boot print across the bronze face. William saw Ethan looking. Don't matter, just metal. It matters. Not today it doesn't. They got Ethan to the table. William brought water, clean cloth, whiskey. The bullet had entered just below the collarbone and exited near the shoulder blade, through and through, like he'd said, which meant no digging for lead. But the wound was ugly, torn flesh and damaged muscle that would take weeks to heal if infection didn't set in first. This is going to hurt, William said, uncorking the whiskey. Everything already hurts. It's about to hurt more. He poured the alcohol directly into the wound. Ethan's vision went white. He heard screaming, distant at first, then realized it was coming from his own throat. His good hand gripped the table edge hard enough to make the wood creak. The pain was enormous, all-consuming, a fire that burned from the inside out. Then it started to fade, settling back into the dull agony he was getting used to. Worst part's done, William lied. He was wrapping the shoulder now, strips of clean cloth pulled tight to hold everything together. You did good out there, son. Better than good. People are dead. People who came here to kill us. That's different. Is it? William didn't answer. He finished the bandaging and helped Ethan into a chair that didn't require sitting up straight. Rest. I need to check on Graves, make sure he's still secured. I'm coming with you. No, you're not. Yes, Ethan said quietly. I am. They stared at each other for a long moment. Finally, William nodded. Stubborn. Just like your mother. You say that like it's a bad thing. Sometimes it is. They went to the barn together, Ethan leaning on his father more than he wanted to admit. The structure had survived better than expected. The old wood was seasoned and hard, resistant to the fire. Inside, the smell of smoke mixed with hay and horse sweat and something else. Blood, probably. The morning had been full of it. Graves was awake. They tied him to one of the support posts, hands behind his back, ankles bound. He'd been unconscious when William did it, but he was alert now, watching them enter with eyes that showed no fear, just calculation. Even battered and captured, he looked dangerous. The boy lives, Graves said. His voice was rough but steady. That's something. Shut up, William said. Why? We going to pretend this is something it's not? Graves shifted slightly, testing his bonds. They held. You won your little battle. Congratulations. Now what? Ethan lowered himself carefully to sit on a hay bale, not trusting his legs to hold much longer. He studied the man who'd tried to kill him. Up close, Graves looked older than he'd seemed from a distance. 50, maybe. Scars on his face and hands that spoke of a hard life, but his eyes were sharp, intelligent. This wasn't some mindless thug. "Now we wait for the law," William said. "Sheriff's dead, but they'll send someone from the territorial capital. You'll hang. Maybe. Maybe not. Lot can happen between now and then." Graves looked at Ethan. "You're the one who hit me. Twice. Most men don't get back up after the first time. Most men don't have a choice." "There's always a choice, boy. You chose to stay and fight. Could have run. Smart move would have been to run." "This is our home." "Home." Graves said the word like it was foreign. "That what you call this? A dying ranch in the middle of nowhere, breaking your back for dirt that barely grows enough to keep you fed?" "Better than what you have," Ethan said. "What I have is freedom. I go where I want, take what I need, answer to no one." "You answer to a rope now." Graves smiled, showing teeth stained with blood. "We'll see." William stepped forward, hand on his pistol. "Give me a reason. Please." "Pa," Ethan said quietly. "He killed people, shot the sheriff in the street. You heard what Charlie said." "I know." "So why are we talking to him like he's human?" Graves laughed, a harsh sound that echoed in the barn. "Human. That's rich coming from you, old man. I seen your work out there. The way you beat Carlos. That wasn't defense. That was rage." "Carlos is dead," William said flatly. "I know. Heard him stop breathing about 10 minutes ago." Graves didn't sound particularly bothered. "He was stupid. Good with a gun, but stupid where it counted. I told him not to get close to people in a fight. He never listened." "You don't care," Ethan said. Not a question. "Should I? We weren't friends. We were men doing a job together. Sometimes the job gets you killed." Graves met Ethan's eyes. "You'll understand that eventually. You killed today. I can see it on you. Changes a man." "I didn't kill anyone?" "Not yet. But you will. That's the thing about violence. Once it starts, it doesn't stop clean. There's always more. Always someone else who needs dealing with." Ethan wanted to argue, but something in the words rang true in a way that made him uncomfortable. He thought about the moment he'd raised the rifle, aimed at living men, pulled the trigger. He'd missed, but the intent had been there. The willingness to end someone's life to protect what was his. "Why'd you come here?" he asked. "Why this ranch?" Graves was quiet for a moment. Then, "You really want to know?" "Answer the question," William said. "It wasn't random. I knew about this place, knew about you." Graves looked at William. "Or rather, knew about someone who used to own this land, before you." William went very still. "What are you talking about?" "The Walsh family. Owned this property 25 years ago. Big spread, profitable, good water rights. Then there was some trouble, financial, legal. I never got all the details. They lost everything. The patriarch, old Ethan Walsh, he died of shame or heartbreak or whatever you want to call it when a man's life work gets taken from him." Ethan felt something cold settle in his stomach. "That was my grandfather." "I know. Your mama was his daughter, wasn't she? Sarah Walsh." Graves smiled without humor. "I knew her, long time ago, before she met your father. We were close." "You're lying," William said, but his voice shook. "Why would I lie? I got nothing to gain from it now. Sarah and I, we had something. Might have been more if her father hadn't run me off. Said I wasn't good enough for his daughter. Probably right about that." Graves shifted his weight. "Then I heard she'd married some war veteran, moved to his ranch, the ranch that used to be her father's land. Didn't sit right with me." William's face had gone white. "You came here for revenge, for something that happened 20 years ago. I came here because I heard the woman I loved died in childbirth, and the man who married her was still living on land that should have been hers. Her son's." Graves looked at Ethan. "Your land, boy, by rights." "That's not how it works," Ethan said. "The bank took the land. Pa bought it fair." "Fair." Graves laughed again. "Nothing's fair. Your grandfather got cheated by men in fancy suits who wrote papers he couldn't understand. Your mother died young. I've spent 20 years riding from one nothing town to another, stealing to survive. Where's the fair in any of that?" "So you decided to rob and kill your way through Millerton," William said. That's your idea of justice. That was business. The personal part was coming here, seeing what you'd done with it. Graves looked around the burned, damaged barn. Looks like you're doing about as well as I expected. William pulled his pistol and aimed it at Graves's head. His hand wasn't shaking anymore. It was perfectly steady. Pa, don't, Ethan said. Why not? Give me one good reason. Because then you're no different than him. I'm nothing like him. You will be if you pull that trigger. They stayed frozen like that for 10 seconds that felt like hours. Then William lowered the gun, his jaw clenched so tight Ethan could see the muscles jumping. You're right, he said quietly. But I want to. That's the worst part. I really want to. Graves watched this with something like interest. The boy's got more sense than you, old man. He knows killing me solves nothing. I'll hang or I won't. Either way, this land stays cursed. It's not cursed, Ethan said. No? Look around. Death and struggle generation after generation. Your grandfather broke himself trying to keep it. Your mother died here. Now you've got blood on your hands before you're 25. Tell me that's not cursed. It's just land. We make it what it is. Deep wisdom from someone who's barely lived. But Graves said it without mockery. You really believe that? I have to. They left Graves tied in the barn and went back to the house. William needed to sit down. The fight and the revelations had taken something out of him. He looked older than he had that morning, older than Ethan had ever seen him. Was it true? Ethan asked. About my mother and him. I don't know. She never mentioned anyone named Graves, but she didn't talk much about her life before we met. Said it was too painful. William stared at his hands. The land was hers by birth, right? That part's true. When we married, I used my military pension and a small inheritance to buy this property at auction. Didn't know it used to be her family's until after. She cried when she saw it. Never said why, and I never pushed. She stayed, though. She did. Made it a home again, or tried to. Then she died doing the most natural thing in the world, and it broke something in me. He looked at Ethan. I've never been sure if bringing her here killed her, if the land really is cursed like he said. That's not how the world works. How do you know? You're 22. What do you really know about how the world works? It was a fair question. Ethan didn't have an answer. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the wind blow through damaged walls. The house felt different now, like it belonged to ghosts as much as to the living. Ethan's shoulder throbbed with every heartbeat, a steady reminder of how close he'd come to joining those ghosts. What do we do now? He finally asked. I'll ride to town, let them know what happened. They'll send a marshal, probably. Take Graves off our hands, collect the bodies. William rubbed his face. Then we rebuild, again, same as always. And if Graves was right, if this land just brings death, then we die here. But we die fighting, not running. William met his son's eyes. That's all we got, Ethan. This land, each other, and the choice to keep going. Some days that's enough. Some days it's not. Today we survived, and that counts for something. A noise outside made them both reach for weapons. William, his pistol, Ethan, a knife from the table. But it was just a horse, wandering back into the yard. One of the gang's mounts, saddle still on, looking for water and stability after the chaos of the morning. I'll get him, Ethan said, standing carefully. You need to rest. I need to move or I'll stiffen up completely. Outside, the sun was fierce and uncaring. The yard looked like a battlefield in some foreign war. Scorched earth, scattered equipment, dark stains that would take rain and time to wash away. Carlos's body was where they'd left it, already starting to attract flies. They'd need to bury him soon, along with the others. Ethan approached the horse slowly, talking soft. It was a good animal, well-trained despite the morning's terror. Let him take the reins without fuss. He led it to the water trough, one of the few things that had survived intact, and let it drink. While the horse drank, Ethan looked at his family's land. Really looked at it, maybe for the first time. Saw it not as routine and obligation, but as something his grandfather had built, his mother had loved, his father had fought to keep. Saw it as the place where he'd become something more than a quiet ranch hand. He'd killed no one, but he'd been willing to. He'd been shot, had felt his life bleeding out into dirt, had kept fighting anyway. He'd shown mercy to a kid who didn't deserve it and rage toward men who probably did. He'd learned his mother had secrets, and his home had a history darker than he'd known, and he was still standing. "That counts for something," he said to the horse. It flicked an ear but didn't stop drinking. Footsteps behind him. William had come out, moving stiff and slow. "We got a problem," the old man said. "What now?" "Graves is gone." Ethan turned fast, then wished he hadn't as pain spiked through his shoulder. "What do you mean, gone?" "I mean, his ropes are cut and he's not in the barn anymore. Must have had a knife hidden somewhere, worked himself free while we were talking." William's face was grim. "He's out there somewhere, probably armed by now if he found any of the guns we missed." They stood in the yard looking at the desert that suddenly felt full of threats. Graves could be anywhere. Behind the barn, in the scrub brush, circling around for another attack. A man like that didn't run. He regrouped. "We need to find him," Ethan said. "You need to stay here and keep pressure on that wound. I'll track him." "You can barely walk." "I can walk well enough to hunt down one man." "Pa, he's not just one man. He's—" A gunshot cracked across the yard. Both of them dropped, William pulling Ethan down behind the water trough. The bullet had come from the north, from the direction of the Badlands. A warning shot or a miss, hard to tell. "You can't run forever," Graves's voice carried on the wind. He sounded far away, but not far enough. "This land is poison, old man. It'll kill your boy same as it killed his mother." William started to rise, rage on his face, but Ethan grabbed his arm. "Don't. That's what he wants." "I'm going to end this. Not like this. Not when he's got position and we're sitting exposed." Ethan pulled his father back toward the house. Another shot kicked up dust near their feet, closer that time. Graves was finding his range. They made it inside and barred the door. William went to the window, peering out carefully. "Can't see him. He's using the rocks for cover, moving between shots." "He's not trying to kill us," Ethan said. "Not yet. He's trying to keep us pinned while he plans something." "Plans what?" "I don't know, but men like that don't run away just to take random shots. He's got an angle we're not seeing." They waited. Minutes crawled past. No more shots came, which was somehow worse than the shooting. The silence felt pregnant with threat. Then they smelled it. Smoke. "The barn," William said, already moving. "He's burning the barn." They rushed to the back window and saw it. Fresh flames, deliberately set, climbing the north wall where their water supply was stored. Graves had circled around, set the fire, and now he was waiting to see what they'd do. Save the barn and expose themselves to his gun, or stay safe and watch everything burn. "We have to stop it," William said. "It's a trap." "I don't care. We lose that barn, we lose the ranch. No shelter for animals, no storage, nothing." William grabbed his pistol. "I'm going." "Wait." Ethan's mind was racing, trying to think like Graves would think. The man wanted them to rush out, panicked and exposed, so they needed to do the opposite. "We use the smoke, same as this morning." "There's not enough of it yet." "Then we make more." Ethan looked around the house, thinking. They had lamp oil, blankets, anything that would burn and create cover. "We set a controlled fire between us and his position, create a smoke screen. Then we get to the barn under cover and put out his fire before it spreads." William stared at his son. "That's actually smart." "Don't sound so surprised." They worked fast, soaked blankets in lamp oil, dragged them to the back door, set them burning. The flames caught quick and thick black smoke poured out, drifting north on the wind. Within minutes, a dark curtain separated them from Graves's position. "Now," Ethan said. They went through the smoke at a run, William as fast as his bad leg allowed, Ethan fighting through pain and blood loss with pure, stubborn will. The barn was burning harder now, flames climbing toward the roof where the hay was stored. If that caught, nothing would stop it. They had buckets, water from the trough, and desperation. Started throwing water on the flames, beating them down with wet cloth, working side by side the way they'd worked this land for 16 years. The heat was brutal, the smoke choking, but the fire was still young, still controllable. A bullet smacked into the water trough, punching through the wood. Water started leaking out. "He's shooting blind through the smoke," William said. "Keep working." Another bullet, this one closer. Graves was adjusting, finding them by sound. They'd be dead in the next few shots. Ethan grabbed the rifle, someone's abandoned weapon from the morning's fight, and fired 3 quick rounds in the direction the shots had come from. Not aimed shots, just noise and threat. Enough to make Graves think twice about standing in one place. It bought them maybe 30 seconds. William got the last of the flames out just as the water trough finally gave up and drained completely. They'd saved the barn but lost their ready water source. Another piece of the ranch damaged, another thing that would need fixing, if they lived through the day. "Back to the house," William said. "We're too exposed out here." They retreated through their smoke screen, both of them filthy and burned and running on fumes. Back inside, they barred the door again and took stock. 2 guns with limited ammunition, no water except what was in the house, and an angry killer somewhere in the rocks who seemed to have infinite patience. "We can't keep this up," Ethan said. His shoulder had started bleeding again, fresh red soaking through the bandages. "I'm slowing down. You're hurt. He's just going to wait for us to make a mistake." "So what do you suggest?" Ethan looked at his father. Really looked at him. The exhaustion, the pain, the fear that lived behind eyes too proud to show it. William Callahan had survived a war, built a life, raised a son alone, and fought off a gang of killers in one morning. He had nothing left to prove. "You go," Ethan said. "Take the horse, ride to town, get help. I'll keep Graves busy here." "Absolutely not. Pa, one of us needs to survive this, to tell what happened, to keep the land. The land doesn't matter if you're dead." "It matters to me." Ethan's voice was quiet but firm. "This is my choice. Same as staying was my choice this morning. You taught me that some things are worth fighting for. Now I'm telling you that you surviving is one of those things." They stared at each other in the dusty light filtering through damaged walls. Outside, the wind blew and the desert waited, and Graves planned his next move. "No," William finally said. "We both go or we both stay. That's how this works." "That's stupid." "Maybe, but it's final." Before Ethan could argue, another sound cut through the afternoon. Hoofbeats. Multiple horses coming fast from the south. They both moved to the window, weapons ready, expecting another attack. What they saw instead made William laugh, a sound of pure relief. "It's the posse," he said. "Charlie must have gotten through. Look, there's Marshal Bradley from the territorial office." Ethan counted 8 riders, all armed, led by a man in a black coat wearing a marshal's star. They'd seen the smoke from miles away and come at speed. Behind them, a wagon that probably carried a doctor. Graves saw them too. From his position in the rocks, he must have realized his time had run out. One more shot, wild and angry and going nowhere. Then the sound of a horse taking off at full gallop, heading north into the Badlands where the posse wouldn't follow. The marshal pulled up in the yard, surveying the damage with experienced eyes. He was maybe 50, built solid, with a face that had seen too much to be shocked by a little violence. "William Callahan?" he called out. "That's me," William said, stepping onto the porch. "I'm Marshal Bradley. Got a report from a young man named Charlie Brennan about a gang hitting Millerton and heading this way. Looks like he wasn't exaggerating." "They came. We dealt with it." Bradley looked at the bodies, the burned structures, the general devastation. "So I see. How many were there?" 6. 3 dead in the yard. 1 got away early on. Their leader escaped just now. You probably heard the shot." "We did. My men are tracking him, but I don't like their chances in the Badlands." Bradley dismounted, his men spreading out to secure the area. "Anyone else hurt?" "My son." William gestured to Ethan. "Bullet through the shoulder." The doctor, a thin man with spectacles, hurried over with his bag. "Let me see." Ethan let himself be examined, prodded, and judged. The doctor made disapproving noises but seemed cautiously optimistic. "Wounds clean, no major vessels hit. You'll live, but you need rest and proper care. I'll stitch this and redress it, but no more heroics for at least 2 weeks." "I'll do my best," Ethan said. While the doctor worked, Marshal Bradley took William's statement. The old man told him everything, the warning from Charlie, the decision to stay, the preparation and the fight. He left out the personal part about Graves and Sarah Walsh. Some things didn't need to be in an official report. "You did well," Bradley said when William finished. "Most men would have run. Can't say I'd blame them. My son wanted to stay. I just backed his play. Your son's either very brave or very stupid. Both probably." William said, and there was pride in his voice. The doctor finished with Ethan's shoulder and moved to check on William, who'd been running on adrenaline and stubbornness for too long. Turned out the old man had cracked ribs from his fight with Carlos, plus a collection of burns and cuts that would have dropped someone with less practice at ignoring pain. "You need to rest too," the doctor said. "Both of you. This ranch can wait a few days." "Ranch doesn't wait for anything," William muttered, but he didn't argue further. As the sun started its descent toward evening, the marshal's men collected the bodies and began documenting the scene. They'd found 4 dead total: Carlos, 2 others from the gang, and surprisingly, the young kid who'd walked away. He'd made it maybe a mile before something had happened. Could have been the injuries he'd taken in the fight, could have been exposure, could have been he'd just given up. "This one's barely old enough to shave," one of the deputies said, looking down at the kid's body. "What a waste." Ethan thought about the moment their eyes had met, the choice the kid had made to lower his rifle. He'd tried to change, tried to walk away from violence, and it hadn't mattered. The desert had taken him anyway. "What about Graves?" he asked the marshal. "My men lost his trail in the rocks. He knows this country, and we don't. But we'll keep looking, and I've got descriptions going out to every town in the territory. A man like that, he'll surface eventually. They always do." Bradley looked at Ethan. "You did good, son. Not many men could have held off a gang like this. Didn't feel good at the time. It never does. That's how you know you're still human." They stayed through the evening, the marshal's men helping repair what they could and securing the property. The doctor insisted both Ethan and William rest, which they did reluctantly, sitting on the porch and watching other people work their land. "Feels wrong," William said. "Feels necessary," Ethan countered. The marshal came over as the light started to fail. "We'll be heading back to town shortly. I'm leaving 2 men here overnight, just in case Graves gets bold. Tomorrow we'll send some people from Millerton to help with cleanup and repairs. The town owes you that much. You stopped these men from hitting other ranches." "Didn't do it for the town," William said. "I know, but they're grateful anyway." Bradley hesitated, then added, "There'll be questions about why you stayed, how you managed to hold them off, all of that. Some folks will call you heroes. Others will call you fools. My advice? Don't pay attention to either." "Wasn't planning to," Ethan said. After the marshal and most of his men rode out, the ranch fell quiet. The 2 deputies Bradley had left took positions in the barn, keeping watch. William and Ethan sat in the house, eating cold food because neither of them had the energy to cook. "You think he'll come back?" Ethan asked. "Graves. Maybe. Men like that, they don't let things go easy." William chewed slowly, favoring the side of his mouth that wasn't swollen. "But not tonight. He's hurt, running, got a whole territory looking for him. He's got more pressing concerns than revenge. For now." "For now," William agreed. They sat in silence, listening to the desert night. Somewhere out there, Graves was riding through darkness, carrying his anger and his twisted sense of justice to whatever came next. Somewhere, Charlie was probably telling everyone in Millerton about the fight. Somewhere, families were learning their sons and husbands and brothers were dead. And here, in a damaged ranch that had seen too much blood, 2 men sat together and tried to figure out what came next. "Thank you," William said quietly. "For what?" "For stopping me. In the barn, when I had the gun on Graves. I would have done it, would have killed him, and spent the rest of my life knowing I'd crossed that line." "You already killed today, Carlos." "That was a fight. It was him or me, no thinking involved. But shooting Graves tied up, that would have been different. That would have been execution." William looked at his son. "You saved me from that, from becoming something I couldn't live with." Ethan didn't know what to say, so he just nodded. They finished eating as full dark settled over the land. The deputies kept their watch, and in the house, father and son eventually found their way to sleep despite pain and exhaustion and everything that had happened. Tomorrow would bring more questions, more work, more complications. But tonight, they were alive. They'd defended their home and kept their souls intact in the process. In the vast and unforgiving desert, that was the best anyone could hope for. Dawn came with no mercy, light spilling across the desert like something inevitable and cold. Ethan woke to pain that had settled deep into his bones overnight, the kind that made every breath an exercise in will. His shoulder felt like someone had driven railroad spikes through it and left them there to rust. He found his father already up, moving through the damaged house with the mechanical efficiency of a man who'd learned long ago that hurt was just part of living. William had coffee going, real coffee, not the chicory blend they usually drank to save money. The smell alone was enough to pull Ethan fully awake. "You look terrible," William said without turning around. "Feel worse." "Good. Means you're still alive to feel it." The old man poured 2 cups and brought one to the table. "The deputies left an hour ago. Said everything was quiet through the night. Marshals sending people from town later this morning." Ethan took the coffee, let the heat seep into his hands. Through the window, he could see the yard in full daylight, scorched earth, blood stains gone dark and permanent looking, scattered debris that would take weeks to clean up properly. The barn stood but looked wounded. The fence was a joke. Everything they'd built felt fragile in a way it never had before. "We need to talk about what happens next," William said, sitting down with a grunt that spoke to his own collection of injuries. "I know." "Do you?" "Because I'm not sure I do." William stared into his coffee like it might have answers. "Last night, lying there trying to sleep, I kept thinking about what Graves said. About this land being cursed, about it taking everyone who tries to hold on to it. It's just land, Pa. Dirt and rock and stubborn grass. It's not cursed." "Your grandfather thought that too, right up until he lost everything." William looked up, and Ethan saw something in his eyes he'd never seen before. Doubt. "Maybe we should sell. Take whatever we can get and go somewhere else. Somewhere that doesn't have this much blood soaked into it." The words hung in the air between them like smoke. "You don't mean that," Ethan said finally. "Don't I? What's here worth dying for? What's here worth you getting shot for? Worth me beating a man to death in the dirt?" William's voice cracked slightly. "I'm 63 years old. I'm tired. And I'm scared that if we stay, next time one of us won't get up. So we run. We survive." Same thing Graves probably told himself every time he robbed someone. Ethan set his cup down, ignored the lance of pain through his shoulder. "You taught me that running solves nothing, that a man stands for something or he's not much of a man at all." "I was wrong." "No, you weren't." Ethan's voice was quiet but firm. "You were exactly right. This land is ours, bought fair, worked hard, bled for. We leave now. It means Graves wins. It means everyone who ever said we couldn't make it here was right. It means your whole life, my mother's life, my grandfather's life, all of it was for nothing." William was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was steadier. "You sound like her. Your mother. She had that same stubborn streak, that same refusal to back down even when backing down was the smart play. Is that a bad thing?" "I don't know anymore." They drank their coffee and watched the sun climb higher. Outside, the desert went about its business with complete indifference to human drama. A hawk circled overhead, hunting. The wind picked up slightly, carrying dust and the smell of yesterday's fires. The sound of horses drew them both to the window, weapons within reach out of habit. But it was just the help from town. A dozen people in 3 wagons, led by Charlie Brennan, who looked like he hadn't slept much either. "Brought supplies and willing hands," Charlie called out as they pulled into the yard. "Marshall said you could use both." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. People Ethan barely knew worked on his family's ranch with a dedication that surprised him. They hauled away debris, patched the barn's burned sections, started repairs on the fence. The women brought food, more than 2 men could eat in a week, and set up a cooking area away from the damaged house. Mrs. Henderson, the older woman from the neighboring ranch, took one look at Ethan's bandages and insisted on changing them herself. She worked with practiced efficiency, her hands gentle but thorough. "You're lucky," she said, cleaning the wound with fresh water and carbolic. "Another inch to the right, and you'd have bled out before help arrived." "Doesn't feel lucky." "Lucky rarely does." She applied new bandages, wrapped them tight. "My husband and we heard the shooting yesterday morning, knew it was bad. We hid in the root cellar until Charlie came by to warn us." "That was smart?" "That was cowardice." Her voice was flat, matter of fact. "We let a boy barely out of his 20s stand alone against killers while we hid underground like rabbits. You survived. That's what matters." "Is it?" She finished the bandaging and looked at him directly. "You and your father, you stood. You fought. Now look around. The whole town showed up to help you, not because they like you particularly, but because you did what they couldn't. You gave them something to admire, to aspire to. That's worth more than survival. She left before Ethan could respond, moving to help with the cooking. He sat there thinking about her words, about the way people kept looking at him when they thought he wasn't watching. There was respect in those looks, but also something else, something like fear. Around noon, a fancy buggy rolled into the yard, pulled by matched horses that looked too expensive for the desert. The man who climbed down wore a suit despite the heat, carried a leather case, and had the soft hands of someone who'd never done real work. "Mr. Callahan?" He approached William. "My name is Edmund Price. I'm an attorney from the territorial capital." "We don't need a lawyer," William said. "Perhaps not, but you may want to hear what I have to say regardless." Price opened his case and pulled out a sheaf of papers. "I represent the estate of Ethan Walsh, deceased. I understand you were married to his daughter, Sarah." William went very still. "What's this about?" "It's about this land, specifically about how it was acquired and who has legal claim to it." Price adjusted his spectacles. "You see, when Mr. Walsh lost this property 25 years ago, it was due to a series of predatory loans issued by a bank that has since been found guilty of fraud in territorial court. The bank's assets were seized, and part of the settlement includes returning improperly acquired properties to their rightful heirs." "That's impossible," William said. "I bought this land fair and square." "You bought it from a bank that had no legal right to sell it, which means, Mr. Callahan, that your purchase was invalid." Price pulled out another document. "However, since you married Sarah Walsh and have maintained the property for 20-plus years, and since your son," he glanced at Ethan, "is the direct heir of Ethan Walsh, there's a legal argument to be made that the land should remain in family hands. Your family hands." "What are you saying?" Ethan asked. "I'm saying that if you choose to pursue this in court, you could potentially own this land free and clear, with no debt attached. The original loan would be void, and the title would transfer to you as Sarah Walsh's surviving family." Price smiled slightly. "It would take time, paperwork, legal fees, of course, but it's possible." William looked at the papers like they might bite him. "How much time? 6 months? Maybe a year? I'd need to file with the territorial court, establish lineage, verify the bank fraud claims as they pertain to this specific property. It's complicated, but I've handled similar cases." "And the legal fees?" "Substantial. But if you win, the court would likely order the original bank's seized assets to cover them. If you lose, well," Price shrugged, "you'd owe me either way. So it's a gamble." "Everything's a gamble, Mr. Callahan, but this one has better odds than most." Price put the papers back in his case. "Think about it. You have my card. If you decide to proceed, contact me within 30 days. He left as smoothly as he'd arrived, his fancy buggy heading back toward civilization. Ethan and William stood in the yard, watching him go. "What do you think?" Ethan asked. "I think lawyers are vultures in nice suits." "But is he right? Could we actually own this place outright?" "Maybe. Or maybe we'd spend a year in legal hell, lose everything paying his fees, and end up worse than we started." William rubbed his face. "I need to think about it." The work continued through the afternoon. By sunset, the ranch looked less like a battlefield and more like a home that had seen hard times but was recovering. The barn was patched, the fence partially restored, the yard cleared of the worst debris. People started heading back to town, tired but satisfied with their work. Charlie was one of the last to leave. He found Ethan sitting on the porch, watching the sun paint the desert in shades of red and gold. "Can I ask you something?" Charlie said. "Sure." "When you decided to stay to fight instead of run, were you scared?" Ethan thought about it. "Yeah, but I was more scared of what running would make me." "See, that's the thing I can't figure out." Charlie sat down, uninvited but welcome. "Everyone in town, we all ran or hid. We let them rob us, kill the sheriff, burn the office. We just took it. And now we're calling you a hero for doing what we should have done. You warned us. That took courage. Not the same kind, not the standing and fighting kind." Charlie was quiet for a moment. "My sister, she was there when they shot Sheriff Hendricks. She said he didn't even reach for his gun. Just stood there and took the bullet. Like he'd given up before they even arrived. Sometimes giving up is easier than fighting. That's what scares me. That I do the same thing. That when it mattered, I just freeze and let it happen." Charlie looked at Ethan. How do you know you won't? How do you know you'll be strong enough when it counts? You don't. You just decide what matters enough to fight for, and then you either do it or you don't. Ethan shifted his weight, trying to find a position that didn't hurt. I'm not brave, Charlie. I'm just stubborn. There's a difference. Doesn't look different from where I'm sitting. After Charlie left, Ethan sat alone with his thoughts. The ranch was quiet now, just him and William and the vast desert that stretched in every direction. Somewhere out there, Graves was still running. Somewhere, the lawyer was riding back to his comfortable office to draft documents that might change everything. Somewhere, people were talking about the fight at the Callahan Ranch, turning it into a story that would grow and change with each telling. William came out and sat beside him, 2 cups of whiskey in his hands. He passed one to Ethan. For the pain, he said. Which pain? All of it. They drank in silence, watching darkness claim the land. Ethan's shoulder throbbed with every heartbeat, a steady reminder of how close he'd come to dying. His father looked older than ever, worn down by violence and revelation and choices that had no good answers. I've been thinking about what that lawyer said, William finally spoke. About the land belonging to your grandfather, to your mother, to you by blood. And I think he's probably right. Not about hiring him necessarily, but about the principle. This was Walsh land before it was Callahan land. You've got more claim to it than I ever did. That's not how it works. You bought it. You've worked it for 20 years. It's yours as much as anyone's. Is it, though? Or have I just been holding it in trust, waiting for you to be old enough to take it over? William took a long drink. I never wanted to be a rancher, you know. After the war, I just wanted somewhere quiet to disappear. Your mother, she's the one who made it a home, who had the vision for what it could be. I've just been maintaining it, keeping it alive until what? Until you were ready, until I could hand it over and know it would be in good hands. William looked at his son. You're ready now. Maybe you have been for a while, and I was just too stubborn to see it. I don't want to take it from you. You're not taking it. I'm giving it. There's a difference. William set his cup down. Tomorrow I'm going to ride into town, talk to the land office, start the process of transferring the title to you. Legal or not, paid off or not, this ranch should have your name on it. Pah! No arguments. For once in your life, just accept something without fighting it. William's voice was firm, but not unkind. You stood for this land when I was ready to run. You bled for it. You've earned it in ways I never did. They sat together until the stars came out, thick and bright in the desert sky. Neither of them mentioned that transferring the title wouldn't matter if the lawyer's claims were true, if the original sale was invalid, if they lost everything anyway. Some things didn't need saying. The night was quiet, peaceful even, like the desert was giving them a moment to breathe before the next challenge came. Because there would be a next challenge. There always was. Graves was still out there. The legal questions remained unsolved. The damage to the ranch was extensive. And the weight of what they'd done, the lives taken, and the violence unleashed, that wouldn't fade with a few days of rest. But for now, in this moment, they had survived. They had each other. They had land that might or might not be legally theirs, but felt like home regardless. In the vast and unforgiving frontier, that was something worth holding on to. Inside, William pulled out an old wooden box Ethan had never seen before. It was weathered and scarred, the kind of thing that had traveled far and seen much. Your mother's, William said, setting it on the table. I couldn't bring myself to open it after she died. Felt like an invasion, but I think she'd want you to have what's inside. Ethan lifted the lid carefully. Inside were letters, photographs, small mementos of a life he'd never known. His mother's handwriting on yellowed paper, delicate and precise. A photograph of her as a young woman, standing in front of a house that looked familiar. This house, before time and weather had worn it down. Another photo of an older man with kind eyes and work-worn hands. His grandfather, Ethan realized. There was a journal too, leather-bound and filled with his mother's thoughts. Ethan opened it randomly and read. The land remembers, she'd written. Every seed planted, every fence post driven, every drop of sweat and blood. Papa used to say that's why we fight so hard to keep it. Not because it's ours, but because we're its. We belong to the land as much as it belongs to us. And when we're gone, it will remember us in the grass that grows and the water that flows, and the wind that carries our stories to whoever comes next. Ethan read the passage aloud. William listened with his eyes closed. She believed that, the old man said when Ethan finished. Believed it so hard it killed her. She wouldn't leave this place even when the pregnancy got difficult, even when the doctor said she needed to be in town near proper medical care. She said this was where her child should be born, on Walshland, continuing the line. You blame the land for her death. I blame myself for not forcing her to leave, for respecting her wishes when I should have overruled them. William opened his eyes. But reading that now, hearing her words, I think she knew. I think she knew she might not survive, and she chose this anyway, chose the land and the legacy over her own life. That's insane. Maybe. Or maybe it's the most sane thing in a world that doesn't make sense. William stood, his chair scraping against the floor. Keep the box. Read it when you're ready. Learn about her, about your grandfather, about the blood and sweat that went into this dirt. Then you decide if it's worth keeping or if we should take that lawyer's offer and walk away. He went to bed, leaving Ethan alone with his mother's memories. Ethan read through the night, learning about a woman he'd never known, but who'd shaped everything he was. She wrote about her father's struggle to keep the ranch running, about crooked bankers and bad weather, and the constant fight against forces too big to control. She wrote about meeting William, about choosing love over security, about the dream of rebuilding what her father had lost. And she wrote about the baby she was carrying, about the hope that this child would be the one to finally break the cycle of loss and hardship. That this child would be strong enough, smart enough, stubborn enough to hold on to what generations had died trying to protect. I'm naming you Ethan, she'd written in one of the last entries, her handwriting shaky from illness or exhaustion. After my father, who taught me that land isn't just property, it's identity, it's memory, it's the only thing that lasts when everything else fades. You'll understand someday. You'll stand on this ground and feel the weight of everyone who stood here before you, and you'll know why we fight so hard for something that's just dirt and rock to everyone else. Ethan closed the journal as dawn approached. His shoulders still hurt. His body still felt like it had been put through a threshing machine. But something had shifted inside him, some understanding he couldn't quite articulate but felt in his bones. This land wasn't cursed. It was just hard. It demanded everything from those who tried to hold it, and it gave back only what you could wring from it through stubbornness and sweat. His grandfather had failed not because the land was against him, but because the world was full of people who took advantage of honest men. His mother had died not because the land wanted blood, but because she'd made a choice, a terrible, beautiful choice, to give her life so her child could have roots. And Graves, with his talk of curses and poison, he was just another man who couldn't accept that sometimes life was hard and unfair, without there being some cosmic reason behind it. William found him at first light, still sitting at the table surrounded by his mother's letters. You didn't sleep, the old man observed. Didn't need to. Learn anything? Yeah. Ethan looked at his father. We're not selling. We're not taking the lawyer's deal. We're staying and we're fighting, whatever that takes. Even if it means more trouble, more people coming after what we have, especially then, because that's what she wanted, what they all wanted. Someone stubborn enough to hold the line when holding it seemed impossible. William studied his son's face and saw something there that satisfied him. All right then, we stay, we fight. We probably die broke and exhausted on this same ground that's killed better people than us. Probably, Ethan agreed, but it'll be our choice. Our choice, Ethan echoed. They made breakfast together as the sun climbed higher, two men preparing for another day of work that would never end, on land that would never stop demanding more. Outside, the desert waited with its usual indifference, and somewhere in the vast emptiness, Graves rode toward whatever fate had waiting for him. But here, in this damaged house on this hard ground, something had been decided. Not through violence or legal maneuvering or grand gestures, but through the simple, stubborn choice to stay when leaving would have been easier. The land would remember. It always did. 3 weeks passed like water through cracked earth, slow, hard, leaving marks that wouldn't wash away. Ethan's shoulder healed the way the doctor said it would, which meant poorly and with complications. The wound closed but left him with limited mobility in his left arm, a stiffness that made reaching overhead nearly impossible. He worked through it anyway, teaching himself to do everything right-handed or not at all. The ranch didn't care about his limitations. William's ribs took longer. The old man moved like every breath cost him something, but he kept moving because stopping meant giving in. They worked side by side most days, rebuilding what the fire had damaged, replacing fence posts, clearing the last of the debris. Neither of them talked much about the fight anymore. It sat between them like a third person at every meal, present but unacknowledged. The town treated them differently now. When Ethan rode into Millerton for supplies, people watched him. Some nodded with respect. Others crossed the street to avoid him. The hardware store owner gave him a discount he didn't ask for. The saloon went quiet when he entered, conversations dying mid-sentence. A woman pulled her child close as he passed, like violence was something that might rub off. "They're scared of you," Charlie said one afternoon, helping Ethan load lumber into the wagon. "Word got around about how many you fought off, about Graves getting away. People don't know what to do with that." "I'm the same person I was a month ago." "No, you're not, and you know it." Charlie secured a rope around the boards. "You crossed a line most of them never will. They look at you and see what they're not capable of. Makes them uncomfortable. That's their problem." "Sure, but it becomes your problem when they start making up stories. I heard someone say you killed all 6 of them yourself. Another said you're in league with outlaws, that the whole thing was staged." Charlie shrugged. "People need things to make sense, and what you did doesn't fit their understanding, so they fill in the gaps." Ethan climbed onto the wagon, his shoulder protesting the movement. Let them talk. But the talk followed him. In the general store, he heard whispers about how he'd shown no mercy, how he'd executed wounded men in cold blood. At the livery, someone suggested he was just as dangerous as the gang, maybe worse because he had the law on his side. The stories grew with each telling, adding details that never happened, removing context until the truth was buried under layers of fiction. Marshal Bradley showed up at the ranch on a Tuesday morning, riding alone. Ethan was working on the barn roof when he saw the dust trail approaching. He climbed down carefully, meeting the marshal in the yard. "Mr. Callahan," Bradley said, dismounting. "Got a minute?" "For the law, sure." They walked to the porch, where William was already waiting with water and the wariness that came from too many visits by official people. Bradley drank deeply before speaking. "I'll get straight to it. We found Graves." Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. "Where?" "Dead. About 60 miles north in a box canyon. His horse had thrown him, broken his leg. He'd crawled maybe 100 yards before he couldn't go any further." Bradley set the cup down. "Took him 3, maybe 4 days to die, slow and alone." "Good," William said flatly. "Maybe, maybe not." Bradley pulled a folded paper from his coat. "We found this on him. Letter he'd been writing. Never finished it, but there's enough there to be problematic." He handed the paper to Ethan. The handwriting was shaky, done by someone in extreme pain, but the words were clear enough. "To whoever finds this," it read, "my name is Thomas Graves, and I'm dying in this canyon for crimes I won't apologize for. But before I go, know this. The Callahan Ranch sits on stolen land. Ethan Walsh lost his property to criminal bankers 25 years ago. His daughter Sarah married a war veteran who bought the land cheap, knowing its history. I came to take back what was stolen. They killed my men and left me to die out here. They're not heroes. They're thieves wearing respectable masks. The law won't touch them because the law protects property over people. But someone should know the truth before I—" The letter ended there, mid-sentence, the handwriting trailing off into nothing. "He was going to die anyway," Bradley said. "The broken leg, the exposure, no water. Even if someone had found him that first day, he wouldn't have made it. But he spent his last hours writing that." "It's lies," William said. "Is it? Because I did some checking. The bank that foreclosed on the Walsh property was investigated for fraud. The case is still pending in territorial court." Bradley looked between them. "I don't care about your land disputes or who owes what to whom. That's civil matters, not my jurisdiction. But I do care about public perception." "Meaning?" Ethan asked. "Meaning this letter is going to get out. People will talk. Some will believe Graves, some won't, but either way it complicates the story. Right now you're the men who defended their home against outlaws. If this gets around, you become men who killed to protect stolen property. See the difference?" "What are you asking us to do?" William's voice was tight. "Nothing. I'm just warning you that the next few months are going to be difficult. There will be questions, maybe legal challenges. The lawyer, Price, he's already filed preliminary paperwork about the land title. This letter gives weight to his claims. Bradley stood. I wanted you to hear it from me first, before the rumors start. After the marshal left, Ethan and William sat in heavy silence. The letter lay on the table between them like evidence at a trial. He's still causing trouble, William said. Dead in a canyon, and he's still ruining things. Was he wrong, though, about the land being stolen from my grandfather? He was wrong about intent. I didn't know the bank was crooked. I bought what was offered, paid what they asked. That's not theft. But if the sale was invalid, then we deal with it. Same as we deal with everything else. William picked up the letter, stared at it for a long moment, then fed it to the stove. They watched it burn, Graves's last words turning to ash. Doesn't change what we decided. We're staying. But staying got harder. The lawyer, Edmund Price, returned a week later with more papers and more questions. He needed documentation they didn't have. Proof of things that had happened before Ethan was born. He needed William's purchase records, Sarah's marriage certificate, evidence of improvements made to the property. Each request felt like an invasion, like their life was being audited by someone who didn't understand what any of it meant. This is a strong case, Price said, spreading documents across their table. The bank fraud is well documented. Your lineage is clear. The only complication is that you've been paying taxes on the property for 20 years, which could be seen as accepting the original sale's validity. We paid taxes because we thought we had to, William said. I understand. But the law doesn't care about what you thought. It cares about what you did. Price tapped one of the documents. However, I think I can argue that paying taxes on fraudulently acquired property doesn't constitute acceptance of the fraud. It's a technical point, but the territorial judge is sympathetic to cases involving bank corruption. How long will this take? Ethan asked. 6 months minimum. Could be longer if the bank's creditors fight it. They have money invested in the liquidation proceedings, and voiding this sale could set a precedent that affects dozens of other properties. Price smiled his professional smile. But we have time on our side, and truth for what that's worth. After he left, taking half their documentation with him, William poured whiskey despite it being barely noon. I hate this, he said. Hate lawyers and judges and people in offices deciding what happens to land they've never even seen. It's the only way to make it legal. Legal. William spat the word. Your grandfather had it legal. Didn't stop them from taking it. They drank in silence, watching dust devils dance across the desert. The ranch looked better than it had 3 weeks ago, but still bore scars. The barn's patch sections were a different color than the original wood. The fence had gaps where they hadn't finished repairs. The house had a permanent smell of smoke that no amount of airing would remove. That evening, a rider came from the Henderson ranch. Old man Henderson himself, looking uncomfortable in his Sunday clothes. Need to talk to you, Henderson said, not dismounting. Both of you. They walked out to meet him. Henderson was 70 if he was a day, weathered and bent from a lifetime of hard work. He'd been their neighbor for 15 years and had never visited the ranch before. I'll be direct, Henderson said. There's been talk in town about what happened here, about that letter Graves wrote, about your land troubles. Some folks are saying you're not the kind of neighbors they want. What folks? William asked. Does it matter? Point is, there's a petition going around. They want the territorial governor to investigate the fight, see if excessive force was used. They're using Graves's letter as evidence that you had ulterior motives for staying and fighting. Ethan felt something cold settle in his stomach. We defended our home. I know that. My wife knows that. But fear makes people stupid, and right now the town's scared. They're scared of more violence, scared that if they don't do something official, more outlaws will target the area. They need someone to blame, and you're convenient. So they're blaming us for being attacked, William said. The disbelief in his voice was painful to hear. They're blaming you for surviving when good men died, for being capable of violence when they're not, for making them feel small and useless. Henderson finally dismounted, his old bones creaking. I'm not signing their petition, and I'm not here to tell you to leave. I'm here to tell you it's going to get worse before it gets better, and you should be prepared for that. Prepared how? I don't know. But men who feel guilty often do terrible things to justify their guilt. Just watch yourselves. That's all I can say. He left, and Ethan felt the weight of it settling over the ranch like a fog. They'd done everything right, defended their home, spared who they could, worked with the law, and somehow they were the villains now. "This is insane," he said. "This is people," William corrected. "Give them a choice between blaming themselves or blaming someone else. They'll pick someone else every time." The petition reached 60 signatures before someone brought it to the governor's office. Marshal Bradley showed up again, this time with a territorial investigator named Wilkins, who had the face of a man who trusted nothing and no one. They went through everything, every detail of the fight, every decision made, every shot fired. Wilkins took notes in a small book, his pen scratching across the paper like an accusation. "And you're certain there were 6 men in the gang?" Wilkins asked for the 3rd time. "7, if you count the one who ran off early," Ethan said, fighting to keep his voice level. "But you only killed 3. We didn't kill anyone. They died in the fight. There's a difference." "Is there?" Wilkins looked up from his notes. "You set traps. You created a kill zone. You lured them in and then systematically eliminated them. That sounds like premeditation to me." "That sounds like defending our home," William said, his jaw tight. "Your home that you may not legally own. Your home that was stolen from your wife's family by corrupt bankers." Wilkins flipped through his notes. According to Graves's letter, he came here to reclaim what was rightfully his. By some interpretations, he had more legal claim to this property than you do. The silence that followed was absolute. Marshal Bradley cleared his throat. "Wilkins, that's not... I'm just following the evidence." Wilkins closed his book. "I'll be recommending a full hearing. The governor will make the final decision, but given the circumstances, I'd say chances are good you'll both be required to testify formally. And depending on what comes out in that testimony..." He let the sentence hang. After they left, Ethan walked out into the yard and kept walking, past the barn, past the fence line, into the open desert where the world stretched forever, and none of it made sense. He heard his father following but didn't stop until he was far enough from the house that screaming wouldn't carry back. He didn't scream, though, just stood there, breathing hard, his shoulder aching and his head full of rage he had no target for. "This is what they do," William said, catching up. "People in power, people who need everything in neat boxes. They can't accept that sometimes life is just hard and complicated, so they investigate and question and tear apart what happened until it fits their understanding. We'll lose everything, even if the legal case goes our way. Even if we prove the land is rightfully ours, this investigation will ruin us. No one will want to work with us. No one will trade with us. We'll be isolated out here." "Maybe. Definitely." Ethan turned to face his father. "Graves won. He's dead in a canyon, and he still won." "No, he didn't. He died alone and in pain, and we're still here." William put his hand on Ethan's good shoulder. "I know it doesn't feel like victory, but survival is all the victory we get sometimes." They walked back together as the sun set, painting the sky in colors that didn't care about human troubles. The ranch waited for them, damaged and disputed and home regardless. That night, Ethan pulled out his mother's journal again, reading by lamplight while his father pretended to sleep in the next room. He found a passage near the end, written when she was pregnant and sick and knowing she might not survive. "If you're reading this, my son, then I'm gone, and you're old enough to understand what I'm about to tell you. This land will hurt you. It will take everything you have and demand more. People will try to take it from you, or make you feel guilty for having it, or tell you it's not worth the fight. And some days, most days probably, they'll be right. But that's not the point. The point is that some things matter not because they're easy or profitable or make sense to anyone else. They matter because they're ours. Because every generation that came before us bled for them and believed in them, and walking away would make all that suffering meaningless. So you hold on, you fight, you endure, not for glory or recognition or even fairness. You do it because giving up means they win. Everyone who ever tried to take what wasn't theirs, everyone who ever profited from someone else's pain, everyone who ever bet on you being too weak or too tired to stand up. You do it because that's what it means to be a Callahan, to be a Walsh, to be someone who stands when standing costs everything. Ethan closed the journal and sat in the darkness, thinking about choices and consequences, about curses that were just bad luck and challenges, about how easy it would be to walk away and how impossible it felt at the same time. His shoulder throbbed, the house creaked. Outside, the desert wind blew like it had for 1,000,000 years and would for 1,000,000 more, indifferent to everything human. And Ethan made his choice. The same one his mother had made, the same one his grandfather had made before losing everything, the same one that had gotten him shot and might still cost him more than he had to give. He chose to stay, not because it was smart or safe or even particularly noble, but because walking away meant Graves had been right, meant the land really was cursed, meant all the blood and pain and stubborn hope that had soaked into this dirt had been for nothing. And Ethan Callahan refused to believe in nothing. In the next room, William lay awake and listened to his son moving around, and he knew without asking what decision had been made, because he'd made the same one 20 years ago, for better or worse. Some choices weren't about right or wrong. They were about who you were and what you could live with. Everything else was just noise. The investigation would come. The hearing would happen. The town would judge them and find them wanting. The lawyer would fight his case and probably lose because the law rarely favored those who needed it most. But tomorrow, they'd wake up on their land. They'd do the work that needed doing. They'd stand for something, even if that something looked like stubbornness to everyone else. And if that wasn't enough, if the world still found them guilty of surviving when others hadn't, well, they'd face that too. Together. On ground that belonged to them in every way that mattered, regardless of what any paper or judge or frightened townsperson said. Because that's what it meant to be a Callahan. To stand when standing cost everything. The hearing was set for the first week of October, in the territorial capital 2 days' ride from the ranch. Ethan and William made the journey in silence, both of them carrying the weight of what was coming like stones in their pockets. The courtroom was smaller than Ethan expected, just a wood-paneled room with benches and a raised platform where the territorial judge sat looking bored before proceedings even started. Judge Harrison was 50-something, with gray hair and eyes that had seen enough frontier justice to be skeptical of everyone's claims. The gallery was half full. Ethan recognized some faces from Millerton, the hardware store owner, a few ranchers, Mrs. Henderson sitting near the back. Others were strangers, probably creditors from the fraudulent bank, lawyers representing various interests, people who stood to gain or lose depending on how this went. Edmund Price sat at their table, papers organized with the precision of a man who billed by the hour. Across from them, the bank's creditors had hired a lawyer named Sullivan, who looked expensive and confident. Wilkins, the investigator, sat behind the prosecutor's table. He'd filed his report recommending formal charges of excessive force and potential manslaughter. The district attorney had declined to prosecute criminally, but agreed to let the civil hearing address the questions. It was a compromise that satisfied no one and threatened everyone. Judge Harrison banged his gavel once. "Let's get started. This is a civil hearing regarding property title for the land currently occupied by William and Ethan Callahan, formerly known as the Walsh Homestead. We'll also be addressing questions raised by the territorial investigation into the incident of September 12th. Mr. Price, you may begin." Price stood, buttoned his jacket, and launched into the legal history. He spoke about bank fraud, about predatory lending, about how the Walsh family had been systematically cheated out of their land. He presented documents, testimony from other victims of the same bank, evidence that the foreclosure had been illegal from the start. Sullivan countered with tax records, with Williams' purchase documents, with the argument that 20 years of occupancy and improvement constituted acceptance of the sale regardless of its origins. He made it sound reasonable, like William had known exactly what he was buying and chose to do it anyway. Then they moved to the fight. Wilkins took the stand first, reading from his report in a monotone that made violence sound bureaucratic. 6 men, 3 dead. Questionable decisions about when to shoot and when to hold fire. He made it sound calculated, cold, like Ethan and William had planned the whole thing as an execution rather than a desperate defense. "In your professional opinion," Sullivan asked, "could the defendants have avoided lethal force? Possibly. They could have fled before the gang arrived. They could have attempted negotiation rather than creating what amounts to a killing field." Wilkins adjusted his glasses. "They had options that didn't involve death, and yet they chose the option that resulted in 3 men dead and 2 others wounded seriously enough to die shortly after." "That's correct." Price stood for cross-examination. "Mr. Wilkins, have you ever been in a gunfight?" "That's not relevant to..." Have you ever had men with rifles advancing on your position, intent on killing you and taking everything you own? Wilkins shifted uncomfortably. No. Then perhaps your professional opinion about what could or couldn't have been done comes from a place of inexperience rather than expertise. Price let that hang for a moment. No further questions. Marshal Bradley testified next. He described the scene when he arrived, the bodies, the damage, the evidence of a sustained fight. He spoke about finding graves in the canyon, about the letter, about how the investigation had revealed that most of the gang had warrants in 3 different territories. In your experience, Marshal, if the Callahans had attempted to flee or negotiate, what would the likely outcome have been? Bradley didn't hesitate. They'd be dead. Men like Graves don't negotiate. They take what they want and kill anyone who resists. The Callahans resisted. That's why they're alive to stand trial for it. The irony in his voice wasn't lost on anyone. Then it was Ethan's turn. He walked to the stand on legs that didn't feel entirely stable, raised his right hand, and swore to tell the truth. His left arm hung at his side, the limited mobility obvious to anyone watching. Sullivan started gentle. Mr. Callahan, can you describe your military experience? I don't have any. No formal training in combat or tactics? No. Yet you managed to create what multiple witnesses have described as a sophisticated defensive position. Traps, fire points, overlapping fields of fire. Where did you learn that? Ethan met the lawyer's eyes. Common sense. If someone's coming to kill you, you make it hard for them. But you went beyond making it hard. You created a situation designed to maximize casualties among the attacking force. I created a situation designed to keep me and my father alive. If that meant making it dangerous for them, so be it. Sullivan smiled like Ethan had just proved his point. At what point did you decide to kill, rather than simply defend? I never decided to kill anyone. I decided to stop them from killing us. They're the ones who kept coming. But you had opportunities to end the conflict without death. The young man you allowed to walk away. Why spare him but not others? Ethan thought about that moment, about the kid's terrified face and the choice that had felt right in a way he couldn't articulate. He lowered his weapon. He made a choice to stop fighting. The others didn't. So you're saying you would have spared any of them who surrendered? I'm saying I didn't shoot anyone who wasn't actively trying to kill me. That's convenient. The dead can't confirm or deny your version of events. Price objected, and the judge sustained it, but the damage was done. The implication hung in the air, that Ethan had executed men who'd tried to surrender, that the whole thing had been murder dressed up as self-defense. The questioning continued for another hour. Sullivan picked at every detail, trying to find inconsistencies or admissions of guilt. Ethan stuck to the truth because he had nothing else, answering each question as simply and directly as he could. Finally, Price stood for redirect. Mr. Callahan, in your own words, why did you stay and fight instead of fleeing? Ethan was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. Because running meant losing everything. Not just the land or the house, but something more. My grandfather built that ranch. My mother loved it enough to die there. My father spent 20 years trying to make it work. If I ran, all of that would have been for nothing. The land would have gone to men who'd just destroy it or sell it or leave it to rot. And I couldn't live with that. Even knowing you might die, especially knowing that. Because some things are worth dying for, not because they're perfect or easy or even make sense to other people, but because they're yours, and giving them up means giving up part of yourself. Ethan looked at the judge, then at the gallery. I'm not a hero. I'm just someone who stood for what mattered when standing was the only choice I could live with. The courtroom was silent when he finished. Even Sullivan seemed to have no follow-up questions. William testified next, corroborating everything Ethan had said and adding his own perspective. He spoke about the war, about seeing men die for causes they barely understood, about coming home and trying to build something that would last. He spoke about Sarah, about her connection to the land, about the promise he'd made to himself to protect what she'd loved. I bought that land legally, William said, his voice steady despite the exhaustion in his eyes. I didn't know about the bank fraud, but even if I had, I would have bought it anyway because my wife deserved to be on her family's ground. If that makes me guilty of something, then I'm guilty, but I won't apologize for it. The hearing lasted 3 days. Witnesses came and went, each adding their piece to a puzzle that never quite came together cleanly. The Hendersons testified on behalf of the Callahans. Charlie Brennan spoke about warning them, about how they could have run but chose to stay. The doctor described the injuries, making it clear that both Ethan and William had come within inches of death. But there were also witnesses who spoke against them. A rancher who'd sold his land and moved away rather than fight, implying that the Callahans' choice to stay had been reckless and selfish. A townsperson who'd seen the aftermath and been traumatized by it, suggesting that the violence could have been avoided. The widow of one of the gang members, who cried and said her husband had been a good man led astray, killed for no reason. Each testimony added layers of complexity until the truth felt buried under competing narratives, each one valid from a certain perspective, none of them complete. On the final day, both lawyers gave their closing arguments. Sullivan went first, painting Ethan and William as dangerous men who'd used legal technicalities to justify murder. He spoke about the sanctity of the law, about how vigilante justice led to chaos, about the need to send a message that taking the law into your own hands had consequences. Price countered with passion, talking about the right to defend one's home, about how the law had failed to protect the Callahans and they'd been forced to protect themselves. He spoke about the bank fraud, about how men like William and Sarah and old Ethan Walsh had been victimized by a system that protected the powerful and punished the honest. Then Judge Harrison called a recess to consider his ruling. Ethan and William sat in the courtroom, not speaking, just waiting, while their fate got decided by a man who'd never set foot on their land or understood what it meant to them. 2 hours later, the judge returned. "I've reviewed the evidence and testimony," Harrison began, his voice carrying the weight of authority that came with the position. "This case presents questions about property law, self-defense, and the sometimes messy intersection of frontier justice and territorial law." He paused, looking down at his notes. Regarding the property dispute, the evidence clearly shows that the Walsh foreclosure was part of a broader pattern of bank fraud. The sale to Mr. William Callahan, while conducted in apparent good faith, was predicated on that fraud and is therefore invalid. However, Mr. Callahan has occupied and improved the property for over 20 years, paid taxes consistently, and had no knowledge of the fraud at the time of purchase. Additionally, his marriage to Sarah Walsh and the subsequent birth of Ethan Callahan creates a direct lineage to the original property owner. Ethan felt his heart hammering against his ribs. Therefore, I'm ruling that the property title will be transferred to Ethan Callahan as the direct heir of Ethan Walsh, with all debts and obligations from the fraudulent foreclosure nullified. William Callahan will retain life estate rights, meaning he may live on and work the property until his death. This ruling acknowledges both the fraud perpetrated against the Walsh family and the good faith improvements made by the Callahans. Price was trying not to smile. Sullivan looked like he'd swallowed something sour. "Regarding the territorial investigation into the September 12th incident," Harrison continued, "I find that the Callahans acted within their rights to defend their property and lives. While the outcome was tragic, the evidence does not support charges of excessive force or unlawful killing. The gang in question had committed multiple felonies, murdered law enforcement officers, and posed an immediate threat to life and property. The Callahans' decision to stand and fight, rather than flee, was their prerogative and does not constitute criminal behavior." He banged his gavel once. "However, I am troubled by some aspects of this case. The preparation of defensive positions, while legal, suggests a degree of premeditation that borders on concerning. The fact that 3 men died in the conflict, even enemy combatants, represents a serious loss of life. I'm therefore recommending that the territorial governor implement clearer guidelines for self-defense in rural areas to prevent future incidents from occurring in this legal gray area." Another gavel strike. Case dismissed. The Callahans are free to return to their property with clear title and no criminal liability. Court is adjourned. The courtroom erupted in noise, some cheering, some protesting, everyone talking at once. Ethan sat frozen, trying to process what had just happened. They'd won. Both cases, both questions. The land was his, legally and completely, and there would be no charges, no punishment for surviving. William grabbed his shoulder, the good one, and squeezed hard enough to hurt. "We did it," the old man said, and his voice was shaking. "We actually did it." Price was gathering his papers, already talking about filing the proper documents, about how long it would take for the title transfer, about his fees, which were suddenly much higher now that they'd won. But Ethan barely heard him. He was looking at the gallery, at the mix of reactions on people's faces. Mrs. Henderson was crying, smiling through tears. Charlie was grinning like he'd won something himself. But others looked angry, disappointed, like justice had somehow failed by letting the Callahans go free. Outside the courthouse, a small crowd had gathered. Some wanted to congratulate them, shake their hands, tell them they'd done the right thing. Others just stared with undisguised hostility. One man spat at their feet as they passed. "Murderers," someone called from the back of the crowd. "They had it coming," someone else shouted back. And there it was. The divided reaction Harrison had warned them about. Some would see them as heroes, others as villains. The truth wouldn't matter as much as perception, and perception would follow them forever. They rode out of the Capitol that evening, eager to put distance between themselves and the courthouse. They made camp in the desert, sleeping under stars that didn't care about legal rulings or moral judgments. "What are you thinking?" William asked, poking at the fire. "That we won, but it doesn't feel like winning. Victory rarely does. You think soldiers celebrate after battles? They just count who's still alive and try to forget what it cost. Is it worth it? All of this, everything we went through?" William was quiet for a long time, staring into the flames. "I don't know. Ask me in 10 years, see if we're still here. See if the land gives back half of what we've put into it." He looked at Ethan. "But I know this. If we'd run, if we'd given up, we'd have spent the rest of our lives wondering what would have happened if we'd stood. At least this way we know. We stood, and we're still standing." They reached the ranch 2 days later, in late afternoon light that made everything look softer than it was. The land stretched before them, familiar and difficult, and theirs in a way it had never been before. No debt, no legal clouds, no questions about who belonged here. Just two men and dirt, and the work that would never end. Over the following months, things settled into a new rhythm. The town's hostility faded to cold tolerance. People who'd signed the petition found other things to worry about. The story of the fight became legend, growing and changing with each telling until it bore little resemblance to what actually happened. Ethan worked the ranch with his limited shoulder mobility, learning to adapt, finding new ways to do old tasks. William's ribs healed, though he developed a cough that winter that worried them both. They hired a hand, a young man from town who needed work and didn't care about the ranch's bloody history. Charlie visited sometimes, bringing news from Millerton. The town had gotten a new sheriff, a stern man from back east who didn't tolerate nonsense. The bank's creditors had moved on to other properties, other disputes. Life continued the way it always did, absorbing trauma and moving forward because there was no other choice. On a spring morning, almost a year after the fight, Ethan stood at the fence line watching the sun rise. His shoulder ached less these days, the stiffness becoming familiar rather than debilitating. The land looked good, grass growing, cattle healthy, the repairs finally complete. He heard his father approach, the old man's steps slower than they used to be, but still steady. "Been thinking," William said, leaning against the fence, "about what your mother wrote in that journal, about how the land remembers." "Yeah?" "I think she was right, but not the way she meant. The land doesn't remember the way people do. It doesn't care about our stories or our struggles, but we remember. And through remembering, we give meaning to dirt that would otherwise just be dirt." Ethan thought about that. So it's not about the land at all. It's about us. It's about both. The land gives us something to fight for, something bigger than ourselves. And we give the land meaning by fighting for it, by bleeding into it, by making it matter. William was quiet for a moment. Your mother understood that. She knew she might die, but she also knew that her death would mean something if it happened here, on ground her family had built. That's not insanity or a curse, that's purpose. What about Graves? What was his purpose? Revenge disguised as justice. The worst kind of purpose because it destroys everything it touches. William turned to face Ethan. He thought taking back the land would fix what was broken in him. But land can't fix people. It can only give them something to build toward or something to destroy. He chose destruction. They stood together watching the sun climb higher, painting the desert in colors that would fade by midday, but were beautiful in the moment. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried out. The wind carried the smell of sage and possibility. "I'm going to die here," William said quietly. "Probably sooner than either of us wants. This winter took something out of me that's not coming back. It's fine. I'm ready. I've made my peace with it. He looked at his son. But I need to know you'll be all right, that you won't spend your life alone out here turning bitter like I did. You're not bitter. I am. Just learn to hide it better. William smiled slightly. Find someone, Ethan. Start a family. Fill this place with voices and life instead of just two old men getting older. That's what your mother would have wanted. What I want. I will. When I'm ready. Don't wait too long. Ready never comes if you keep waiting for it. They went back to work. The conversation closed, but not forgotten. And Ethan thought about the future for the first time in months. Not just survival, but actual living, building something beyond just holding on to what was already there. That afternoon, a rider came from town. Not with trouble this time, but with a letter. It was from one of the gang members who'd escaped that first day. The one in the bowler hat who'd run when the fighting got serious. The letter was brief, written in careful script. Mr. Callahan, you don't know me and have no reason to care what I think, but I was there that day, and I saw what you did. You could have killed me when I ran. Had a clear shot, but you let me go. I've spent the last year trying to figure out why. Best I can figure, you're a better man than most, including me. I joined that gang because I was angry and stupid and thought taking from others would fill something empty inside me. It didn't. And watching good men die for a bad cause made me realize I was on the wrong path. I've turned myself in, confessed to my part in other robberies. I'll probably hang or spend the rest of my life in prison. But I wanted you to know that your mercy, such as it was, gave me a chance to choose something different. I wasted that chance by being a coward, but at least I got it. That's more than I deserved. I hope the land treats you better than it treated men like me. You earned it. We didn't. That's the difference. The letter wasn't signed, but Ethan knew who it was from. He showed it to William, who read it twice before handing it back. What are you going to do with it? The old man asked. Keep it, as a reminder. Of what? That mercy matters, that choices matter, that we're defined not by what we survive, but by what we choose to do while surviving. Ethan folded the letter carefully. Graves chose revenge. That kid chose to walk away, but then went back to the gang. But I chose to let him go. And even though it didn't save him, it mattered. It has to matter. William nodded slowly. Your mother would be proud of you. Not for the fighting or the surviving, but for that. For understanding that strength isn't just about what you can endure or destroy, it's about what you choose to build or spare. As the seasons turned and the years began to pass, the story of the Callahan Ranch became part of frontier legend. Different versions circulated, some closer to truth than others, all of them missing pieces that only Ethan and William would ever know. Some said Ethan Callahan was a stone-cold killer who'd gunned down 6 men without mercy. Others said he was a hero who'd stood alone against impossible odds. The truth, as always, was somewhere in between and more complicated than any story could capture. But there was one thing that didn't change, one truth that held steady, regardless of how people told the tale. Ethan Callahan had been given a choice between running and standing, between giving up and holding on, between becoming bitter like Graves or building something worth the cost. And he'd chosen to stand. Not because it was easy or glorious or even guaranteed to work, but because some things mattered more than comfort or safety or what other people thought. Some things were worth fighting for, bleeding for, enduring for, not because they were perfect, but because they were yours and you chose to make them matter. The land didn't care. The land would outlast all of them, indifferent to human drama and determination. But Ethan cared. William cared. Sarah and old Ethan Walsh had cared. And through that caring, through that stubborn refusal to give up what was theirs, they'd made the land more than just dirt and rock and water. They'd made it mean something. And in the end, on the unforgiving frontier where most men broke and many died and few left anything behind worth remembering, that was the only victory that mattered. To stand for something when standing cost everything. To choose who you'd become when the choosing got hard. To remember that mercy and strength weren't opposites, but partners in the difficult work of being human. The sun set over the Callahan Ranch, painting long shadows across ground that had seen too much blood and too many tears but held firm anyway. In the house, father and son ate dinner together, talking about tomorrow's work because there was always tomorrow's work. And somewhere in the vastness of the desert, the wind blew across a canyon where Thomas Graves had died alone. his bones scattered now, his story ending the way all stories of revenge and bitterness ended, with nothing to show for it but dust. While on the ranch that bore his family's name, Ethan Callahan slept that night without nightmares, his shoulder aching and his conscience clear, knowing he'd done what needed doing and paid what needed paying. The land remembered in its way. And so would he.